Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome. My name is Ruby Beth Beauty-Cant. I am the Associate Director of Movement Partnerships here at Movement Law Lab. And this is unprecedented, how lawyers can build power to defeat authoritarianism. And today is our first session in a 4-part series, and we're really happy to have you here. I'd like to start by asking folks to go ahead and introduce yourselves. Please do so in the chat. Let us know your name, your pronouns, where you're joining us from, and why you are here. What brought you here today? In general, please feel free to use the chat to connect with each other. We will have the opportunity to ask questions of our panelists using the Q&A function as well. But feel free to have conversation in the chat, connect with other folks, see where folks are from, and use it in that way. I am going to go ahead and offer a few words about who we are and why we're here. We are here because we are troubled about the rise in authoritarianism in the US and around the world, which I know is big and heavy and frankly scary reason to be coming together today. But we feel like the good news is it is not too late to cohere our forces and defeat authoritarian advances. All of us have an extremely important role to play, which we will get into in a lot more detail as our conversation goes on. But for now, just wanting to say we need you. We're so thankful that you are here. We need all of us. We need a strong civil society to combat what is here and what is coming. And we need strong organizers who are going to turn the tide. Excuse me. As lawyers, we know that it is our duty to bolster and defend and back up organizers who are on the front lines of these fights. And today we get to hear from two movement legends, Linda Burnham and Max Elbaum, who are going to break all of this down for us. As we dive in and we get to hear from our speakers, I am going to ask of you all that you try and push yourselves to be present. And I know for some folks that means resisting the very difficult to resist urge of checking emails throughout the webinar. For some of you, that might mean getting up and walking around if that's available to you in order to stay focused. And for others of you, we know that's none of those are possible today, and that's okay. Distractions abound for all of us. Additionally, we know that our hearts are all over the world in this moment. We know that folks' hearts are in Gaza and in Congo, and just wrestling with the deeply personal truths about the difficulties of the lives of the people that we love. So all of that, all of those realities, all of you is welcome here. And we need all of you for these conversations. If we have any chance of building a new multiracial, pluralistic democracy, we need all of us. And we're really honored that you decided to spend some time with us today. So today's webinar, why progressive lawyers must join the pro-democracy fight, understanding today's authoritarian crisis. We're really excited for our speakers to share a framework with you. We invite you to wrestle with it. We invite you to hear something new today, and if possible, to let it change you. We're hoping to lay some foundations and continue these conversations over the next 3 sessions. I'm going to tell you just a little bit more about Movement Law Lab and why we think it's so important for all of us, whether you are an experienced legal practitioner, or if you're new to this, or someone who's just interested in or identifies as a movement lawyer, why it's crucial that all of us level up our work as it relates to democracy. And while it might not be immediately apparent, there is a through line of democracy defense that runs through all of our work. And that really, it doesn't matter what sector you're in, what issue, or what place you work. It's simply a truth. So just a few quick words about Movement Law Lab, excuse me, who's putting on this training. We work to transform the legal sector. We train lawyers and legal organizations to go beyond winning cases and towards building collective power. Movement lawyers work in deep collaboration with social movements and attempt to leverage every legal hook possible to build the collective power needed to transform our political and economic systems. And we do so towards human dignity, multiracial democracy, and ecological harmony. For our team, what that means is that we're working to build a legal infrastructure for grassroots progressive movements. Transformational societal change occurs when directly impacted individuals take collective action, get to lead their own struggles, and gain power to change the conditions of oppression. Therefore, as lawyers, our role is to use our legal skills to defend, protect, bolster, and embolden social movements, working to create those changes. One of the ways in which we do that is that we house a global network of movement lawyers that includes movement lawyers from 26 countries. And we have been studying together the uptick in authoritarian tactics worldwide. And just as importantly, what intervention strategies are working to fight against that uptick. We know that our struggles are connected, and we are getting closer and kind of clearer as we do this studying together as to what it means for the legal sector to take on these fights. So today's session, excuse me, we're hoping to lay groundwork for understanding both what we need to block by shrinking oppressive power, as well as what we need to build by growing people power. To give you just a preview quickly of the sessions that we have ahead, session 2 is really about getting information. You'll learn from Maurice Mitchell of the Working Families Party and Alana Greer of Community Justice Project in Florida about, they'll actually be interviewing each other about the role of progressive lawyers in the Block and Build pro-multiracial democratic movement. And hopefully together we will answer this question of how do lawyers need to orient themselves to be in right formation to our social movements. Session 3, we'll unpack some history to answer the question of how did we get here, and dive into the history of the conservative legal movement. So the sobering truth is that the legal sector is not presently positioned to guard against the imminent anti-democratic threats from the MAGA bloc. Those of us whose legislative sessions just started know this very, very well. We'll learn from our speakers about the historic relationship between conservatism and the legal sector and how the right took over the law. The idea being that we can use this history to teach us about the terrain of law today. In session 4, we'll zoom back out to surface some lessons and tactics of fighting authoritarianism developed by movements and lawyers from other parts of the world. The spirit of internationalism is absolutely essential to understand that we are not alone, neither in our problems nor in the solutions to those problems. And in this session, we'll hear from an internationalist who will place the advance of the extreme right as a global phenomenon, as well as a Brazilian organizer who will share their successful electoral experience in 2022 and the crucial role that popular movements played in fighting back. I know this is a lot. This stuff is dense and heavy and complex. And we're hoping to do some really important learning together and sharpen each other along the way. If y'all are down to go on this journey with us, we believe you are, since you are here. Please plan to join us for all of the sessions, bring coworkers, bring friends. If you registered and you end up missing a session, you can watch a video link afterwards. But please join us. We have put a lot of love into putting this series together, and we're really excited to have you here. I am going to hand it off to my colleague, Nikki Thanos.
Hey everyone, it's so great to see a lot of familiar names and also folks who I haven't met yet. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Nikki Thanos. She, hers. I'm the Director of Training and Praxis at Movement Law Lab. And I wanted to start by just posing some questions to you. You don't have to answer it loud, but do engage these questions for yourself and I invite you to think on these questions as you listen to Linda and Max today. Do you think of the work you're doing right now as part of the work to build a multiracial pro-democracy movement? What are the organizers in your life worried about? What kind of legal support do they need right now? What do you think is the role of lawyers to thwart the authoritarian advance in this country? What does that mean for you personally? Max and Linda are going to break this down, but we wanted to start by stating the obvious. We're being decidedly out-organized by the right on the terrain of law. And losing doesn't feel good. There are real material impacts for our people, and we feel it everywhere. It's thus imperative that we make big pivots to course correct. And to be successful, we need progressive lawyers en masse, like every single one of you on this call, to begin to see your work as part of this bigger pro-democracy fight, and to join efforts to build a new base of power in an emerging multiracial pro-democracy bloc. We very much need you. Will you join us? The best chance we have to counter authoritarianism is to build a new democracy in this country, what we're going to call throughout this series a multiracial, pluralistic democracy. We've never had that kind of democracy in this country, and it's really different than the system they tell us is a democracy today. So I'm going to invite you to be in a dreaming space, a place of hope and creativity and imagination. We're talking about a democracy that will require massive changes to our economic system, an acknowledgement of the harms of slavery and settler colonialism, with strong provisions for reparative justice, and a commitment to meaningful engagement and inclusion of everybody, like really everybody. Obviously, that doesn't sound like the democracy we have right now, right? So that's why I want us to commit to being in this like an imaginative, more of a dreaming stance as we're diving in. This fight is about both big D and little d democracy. Big D, voting rights, elections, the stuff we normally think about when we think about democracy. And those are important terrains of struggle. And we really need lawyers to continue blocking and building there. But we're also talking about our experience of democracy every day in the places closest to us, our workplaces, our neighborhoods, our schools, our doctors' offices. That's what we're calling little d democracy fights. And we've been talking to organizers across the country, and they tell us they really don't have enough lawyers to back them up in those fights. In fact, for the Movement Law Lab team, that's how we got into all of this work, because we were starting to field a lot of questions from organizers, including from Linda and Max, who are not just tracking the authoritarian threat, but increasingly living it. The authoritarians are literally already killing our people, with trans folks, immigrants, and people of color at the top of their lists. They are threatening the tax and entity status of our organizations. They're changing laws to make it harder for us to protest and fight back. They're coming after affirmative action and our right to abortion. They're trying to pit workers against each other. We've been hearing about all these authoritarian threats and like implemented threats, right, from organizers around the country. And they've been asking us, they're like, you all know the lawyers, right? Do the lawyers have a plan? And so that's a question we wanted to bring to all of you, this collective question that we're getting from organizers around the country. Do we, as a legal sector, have a plan to thwart the authoritarian advance in this country? My personal answer to that question is that we've got a lot of incredible work moving, but presently, the sum of our work is not greater than our parts. And so then the question becomes, what must we do now to get the legal sector in formation? And we need all of you to answer that question. The good news, as Ruby Beth mentioned, is that it's not too late. We have been studying how folks in other countries have pushed back against authoritarians, and there is one common thread in all of the success stories: a strong civil society anchored by organizers, right? The same people we as movement lawyers are rolling with already to win safe jobs, freedom of movement across borders, an abolitionist future, a just transition, all the stuff that you all just told us in the chat that you're working on. So the best way to defeat the authoritarian threat is to back up, bolster, protect, and defend our people, our social movements. So if you're already doing this work, let's keep going, and let's be sure that the work you're already doing articulates to this bigger fight against authoritarianism. And if you're not already working in this way, welcome. There's a place for you in this struggle, and we are so, so, so happy that you're here. We are going to need so many more people throwing down if we're going to win. If we look at the democracy defense legal work that's being done around the country right now, most of it really is to defend the gains of the past, especially the gains of the civil rights and voting rights, gains of the 1960s. And that's a lot of work of defending constitutional norms and processes. And it's work that mostly happens in court. Some of you might be doing that work. If you are, thank you. It's super important work, and we're so happy. We need to continue to really build your ranks. And also, alone, that work is not going to be enough. Instead, we have to start to think about lawyering for pro-democracy fights as a project that is primarily about building social movement power. Organized communities coming together to advance a collective agenda to change culture, systems, and power. That is the heartbeat of this fight. We need movement lawyers who can struggle alongside communities over the long haul to win lasting transformative reforms, while at the same time developing new leaders, growing the power of grassroots formations, and achieving governing power. To do that, we need a complex understanding of power, one that goes far beyond the power to win a simple lawsuit or an isolated campaign. We've got to be able to recognize the need to develop the power to set the agenda, to achieve governing power, and to make advances in the terrain of narrative, worldview, and culture. And we have to move in sync with organizers. So that's why today we're starting out this series with two longtime organizers, and I'm going to kick it back to Ruby Beth to introduce them. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Nikki. Our speakers today are Linda Burnham and Max Elbaum. Linda Burnham is a writer, activist, strategist, and political educator whose decades of experience focus on anti-racism, social justice, feminism, and securing democracy. Max Elbaum has been involved in peace, anti-racist, and radical movements since joining Students for a Democratic Society in the 1960s, and is the author of Revolution in the Air, 60s Radicals Turn to Lenin, Mao, and Che, a history of the 1970s and 80s new communist movement, in which he was an active participant. Max and Linda, along with Maria Poblet's recently co-edited Power Concedes Nothing, How Grassroots Organizing Wins Elections. We truly have two living legends with us today, and it's an honor to be in dialogue with both of you. Thank you. I'm gonna start us off by asking a big question that I know we need to start with, which is, what is the MAGA bloc? What are the features of the bloc? What are the historic roots and global connections? And I'd like to direct this question to start off to Max.
Thanks, Ruby Beth. Thanks everybody at Movement Law Lab for organizing this very timely session and for organizing it in the spirit of both hard-headed realism and forward-looking optimism about our capacity to win. That's the kind of spirit that we need in this project at this time. The MAGA bloc, it's useful to start with that, appropriate, because for the last several years and continuing into the current moment, the main dynamic shaping US politics is the drive of the MAGA bloc to impose a white Christian nationalist agenda on the country. MAGA, as Nikki and Ruby Best stated, it's the US contingent of a global rise in authoritarianism. And in terms of the United States, it's the latest manifestation of a 60-year backlash against the social justice gains of the 1960s for racial justice, gender justice, peace, the beginnings of the modern LGBTQ movement, environmental protection, and especially targeted the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which ended legal Jim Crow and broke the white monopoly on political power. This 60-year backlash has gone through stages from Nixon's Southern strategy in the late 60s and into the 70s, to the ascent of Ronald Reagan and what we then called Reaganomics, and today is usually termed neoliberalism, through the Tea Party response to the election of the first Black president, and since 2015, 2016, the Make America Great Again, or MAGA bloc, that cohered around Donald Trump. They've made a lot of headway in the last 60 years. The MAGA bloc has captured control of the Republican Party. It's captured control of the Supreme Court, and they have trifectas in the Republican Party, captured by MAGA, now has trifectas in 23 states, which are essentially authoritarian enclaves and laboratories by which they're already introducing and putting into practice their agenda that they envision for the whole country. They're not at all shy about putting out and being explicit about their agenda. Anyone can read it. It's been laid out in the Project 2025 Mandate for Leadership document produced by the Heritage Foundation, with details about every single area of government responsibility, their vision for that. And it's not just on paper a vision. There are already teams of people working with the essentially a presidential transition team, mapping out the personnel to staff the implementation of that vision should Trump be elected president in 2024. If there's any doubts about the white Christian nationalist character of that agenda, we can point to in the last period and what's explicit, the intention to deport 12 million people from the United States, and the rhetoric, the demonization of using language like vermin, infection toward immigrants. And in the last few days, the decision by the Alabama Supreme Court that embryos are babies, and an explicit theological justification for that decision. Who's the MAGA bloc? The driving forces, and there's two driving forces of the MAGA bloc. One is a section of the capitalist ruling class, especially centered in the fossil fuel industry, and a cohort of right-wing billionaires who made their fortunes during the period of the neoliberal model, and many of whom are ideological conspiracy theorists, is their basic program. All wealth to the wealthy, turn energy policy over to the fossil fuel industry. The other main component of MAGA is a multi-class coalition of all those who are deeply invested in racial and gender hierarchies, being the way that this society is organized. There are people from all classes in that, but it's a myth to say that this is fundamentally a working class movement. The movement is driven by sectors of the capitalist elite and the middle classes. MAGA has developed a very powerful infrastructure over the last 60 years, one building block at a time. They have an unmatched media apparatus which means when talking points are developed by the core of the MAGA bloc, within hours, they're broadcast to millions of people on Fox News and the other right-wing media outlets that are even to the right of Fox News. They have a grassroots mass organization in the white evangelical churches, which was consciously developed to penetrate that and to use that mass organization as a counterweight to those organizations which in US history have been the bulwark of progressive change, the labor movement, and the Black church. They have well-funded think tanks developing narratives and policies, and organizations like ALEC that write legislation for state governments, municipal governments, and so on, that in a division of labor, they provide that expertise to their elected representatives. Something that we'll come back to later, there's been a systematic plan to take over the judiciary, which has essentially succeeded at the Supreme Court level. So they have a legal arm. And they have, in the last few years, incorporated into their coalition an explicitly fascist component, armed white supremacist militias, and threats of violence and use of non-state violence has become part and parcel of the operational work of the MAGA bloc. We're up against a very formidable foe. And I am firmly in the camp that they can and will be defeated, but they cannot be defeated unless we look in the face of what they've developed. We have to break with all "it can't happen here" kind of thinking and any tendency to underestimate what MAGA intends to do and their capacity to do it. James Baldwin said, "Not everything that's faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Max. I really appreciate this overview. There was a lot in there. I'm already seeing some folks having some follow-up questions in the Q&A section. So as questions come up, folks, please put them in the Q&A. If you look on your Zoom screen, you'll see the chat, and then there should be a Q&A as well. Please put questions in there. So Linda, I'd like to ask you, having laid this out, what is the block and build framework for fighting back against this MAGA block?
Thanks, Ruby Beth. Thanks to you and to Nikki for getting us organized. Thanks also really to everybody who's here. I know everybody's got enormous time pressures, all kinds of things to do, and you've chosen to be here. So deep appreciation to all of you, and I'm eager to be in conversation and to hear what your questions are. So Max has kind of laid out the terrain, what we're facing, the challenges we're facing. I want to talk just a little bit about block and build, which is a framework. So block and build as a terminology has been around, floating around the left for a while. And I want to really thank Max and the folks at Convergence for putting some flesh on it. There's a syllabus that's available to folks who, a 6-part syllabus that Convergence has developed that's available if you want to go deeper on this. But basically, block and build is an attempt to answer the question of, is there a common framework? Can we develop a framework to meet the main strategic tasks of the moment? Can we develop a framework that will address the immediate challenges posed by MAGA, by the MAGA bloc just described, as well as the longer term challenges of building left political power? So on the bloc side, We're talking about how do we actually block the rise of authoritarianism, the rise of fascists and proto-fascists in the US. Most immediately, how do we block MAGA's role towards the takeover of the executive branch and the administrative apparatus in the most immediate 2024, 2025. Recognizing that authoritarians and fascists are flexing in all different kinds of ways. How do we protect ourselves? How do we check them? And how do we protect ourselves on the block side? On the build side, what we're talking about is the capacity. How do we build the capacity and the power of the left, of the progressive to left side of the spectrum, to shape the country's future, to shift the balance of forces, to shift the balance of power, to move in the direction, I think, as Nikki was saying, of multiracial, gender inclusive democracy that uplifts the rights and dignity of working people, that limits the power of capital, that starts to check or dramatically reduces wealth inequality, that looks after the stewardship of the planet and its resources. How do we get from here, where we are, to there? That's the build side. And we'll get to, I think, a little later in our conversation, the fact that we will require many things, one of them being governing power at local, state, and national levels, and implement the kinds of policies that will both defend us, check the sway of unregulated capital. So we'll come back in a bit to governing power. So basically, block and build is coming to kind of a common understanding, broad strokes, of what our strategic are at the broadest, while also recognizing that depending on where folks are geographically in relationship to issues, what sectors they're in, that how we develop tactics and strategies and practices to implement block and build will vary. So just go just a little bit deeper, and somebody's going to give me a time check at some point on the block side, blocking the authoritarian role. As Max already noted, we're on the back foot. We're on a deep defensive. We are being rolled. The Alabama ruling just being the most recent and most dramatic. The Harvard takedown and the ways in which various actors came into play and what that signals for us, et cetera. So you know what all of that looks like. But there's also the other side of this, which is to recognize that the MAGA bloc is a minority, that it's exercising an outsized degree of influence relative to its numbers, that's because of a combination of deeply embedded features, country's DNA, but also long-term brilliant strategizing on the part of the right, goal setting. I think you'll come back to that in future sessions. Also, obviously, the depredations of late stage capitalism and how that's affected the temper and mood of the country and of different classes. And then the one-off of Trumpism and his unique combination of charisma, yes, charisma, not to us, but clearly to others, narcissism, opportunism, and strongmanism. So very interesting set of circumstances that gotten us here. The block in the immediate, the block is about trying to figure out how to face 2024, the lead up to the elections. People are already obviously in motion to try and figure out both how to block the prospect of another Trump presidency and also how to protect the congressional representatives and others on the left from the attacks that they're already facing. But longer term, the bloc side speaks to the fact that the genie is out of the bottle. So it's not about Trump. He could fall over tomorrow, God willing. The white supremacists, the Christian nationalists, the conspiracists have been roused and they're not going anywhere. So the bloc is a long-term, they're going to be a prominent feature of the landscape. So the bloc side is a long-term proposition. And what it means, I think, for us is trying to sort out what does it take to build the broadest opposition, the broadest possible oppositional alliance to the rise of fascism and authoritarianism. And that's been posed as what does it take to build an alliance that includes street fighting anarchists all the way over to anti-Trump generals? What does it take to build an alliance that I think Maurice uses the term from Chomsky to Cheney? So really thinking about the breadth of the alliance that's going to be required to defend just the baseline of democracy, to preserve and restore baseline elements of what many of us have already recognized as a tattered and inadequate, but that itself is under attack. So that requires us thinking along the lines of issues, along the lines of geography, along the lines of sectors, of mapping left, right, and center, of developing relationships, being in relationship to forces to our right, to center forces, to building ties with individuals, organizations, and networks in the context of practical work to defend democracy. So building that pro-democracy alliance that's capable of identifying threats, of developing strategies and tactics, of being engaged in ongoing communication and exchange of intelligence and lessons. On the build side, this is about building the capacity of the left to build its own independent power. I worked, as some of you know, on something called Project 2050, and that was an effort to engage with folks on the left to think out over the longer term, to think past one election cycle to the next, to engage on the question of what are the institutions and infrastructures that we need to build a strong left, and to begin to coordinate over issues and sectors. So I think what we're doing here, is to take honest stock from the distinct perspectives, from distinct locations that we inhabit on the day-to-day. This is an example of that. To learn from each other, to over time get information, as a matter of fact, to build the kinds of ties that will be able to withstand the incredible pressures that we will face in the future that will surely come. To understand that we'll have differences over particular policies, particular tactics, but to keep coming back to build the left and to block the right. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Linda. I did want to follow up and kind of dig a little bit on this idea. Maybe perhaps it's a zoom in kind of what you've laid out here, which is that, would you say, I'm going to ask this question and then maybe I'll say, do you think any of what I just asked is fair to say? But the left has increasingly become better in participating in the electoral arena specifically, though there's a long way to go. Why do you think the left has historically forgone contending for governing power? Is that fair to say? What has changed now? And what do we need to do to defend and advance multiracial, formal, and everyday democracy in that fight for governing power?
Yeah. So why the left has foregone governing power. Let me just reframe for just a second. So I think the left has over time exercised all kinds of all different types of power, some more successfully than others, yeah? So there's the power to protest and disrupt. There's there's economic power that's exercised through strikes and boycotts and anti-corporate campaigns. There's issue-based and constituency-based organizing, oftentimes oriented towards getting policy change. The left has also engaged in building alternate institutions, most recently in the form of mutual aid, reparations work, healing strategies, all kinds of ways of just building community, many different ways that the left has exercised power. And all of them have their place, and all of them are important in one way or another. In terms of governing power, let's just talk for a quick minute about even what it is we're talking about when we're talking about governing power. I mean, I don't know how many of you all have been in this conversation, but often enough, I think the left is in conversation without defining its frame. So let's talk a little bit about what we might mean by governing power. So I think the capacity of the left, building the capacity of the left to use the mechanisms of the state apparatus to either reinforce the status quo, is the capacity of anybody governing power, to reinforce the status quo, which is itself always changing, or to instigate change, to change its status quo. That it's to use the state apparatus to implement policies that particular worldview, affect the transformation, to affect and transform the quality of people's lives through executive and administrative and legislative or judicial action, and also to use this state apparatus to change the terrain of struggle between political blocs. So elements of the left, I'll say, have actually done this for decades in the form of moving city council more progressive directions, in the form of electing mayors. I knocked on doors for the Harold Washington campaign, probably before most of you were born. So it's not that the left has not gone for governing power, but it has not done so strategically. It has not done so in a coherent way. And I think that there's a lot of different reasons for that. Sections of the left have been abstentionist, so they haven't engaged in electoral politics. It's been like, a plague on both your houses, two parties of the capitalist class, why even engage, et cetera. There's, of course, third partyism, which we have today in the shape of Cornel West's campaign or Kennedy's campaign. Oftentimes, those are about messaging and not about actually achieving political power. But it's also true, that goes way back to socialist parties and communist parties who also run candidates at different, local, statewide, or national levels. So there's been a tendency on the left towards third partyism. I think there's also been a reluctance to coming to terms with the very real barriers that we face in the US for third parties, and coming to terms with the Democratic Party, how to develop a relationship of independence and relationship and struggle with the Democratic Party. What does that look like? Clearly, looking at the Republican Party, party takeover is a thing, but the left has not, that somehow hasn't fully registered on the left. And then we've had bouts of real ultra-leftism and delusion, wherein sections of the left imagined that it was possible to gain power while bypassing an arena in which the majority of people express themselves politically. I guess one last thing about this, and then maybe I'll let it go, which is that we, in recent times, been all that well structured to orient towards governing power. So the 501c3 structures in particular that are issue-based or constituency-based geared towards governing power in particular. So I will say that that's changing, has changed considerably in the last period. I want to refer people to Grassroots Power Project has put out a book on governing power that's really worth taking a look at. So just go to their website, Grassroots Power Project. So it's changing. It's obviously changing in the context of the work that the Working Families Party is doing. So you'll be in position to talk about that. But the building of pipelines, the relationship building, the kind of understanding that this is a multi-year strategy that's very complex. And then also to understand that unless we shift this terrain at local, statewide, and national levels, we're in serious trouble. And we will continue to get beat about the head and shoulders by authoritarians. So I guess that's what I'll say about that for now.
Thank you, Linda. Really appreciating this framework and analysis. Max, I did want to give you the opportunity. We have about 1 minute left for this question. Is there anything that you would like to add?
In the immediate past, the decisive turning point was the 2016 election, where Trump being elected and Bernie's campaign and how successful it was changed the dynamics within the left. Trump's election convinced people that it really mattered which of the two parties controlled the federal government. It wasn't a question of Tweedledum and Tweedledee. They might be both capitalist parties, but there was a big difference between their agendas. And Bernie's campaign and what came off of Bernie's campaign convinced a lot of people on the left that there were opportunities within the electoral arena, and not just purely electoral, but to harmonize and synergize electoral work with building grassroots, base building, winning issue fights, and so on. So I think that was the turning point. And a lot of there were pioneer groups that tried to develop a long-range power strategy, state by state, somewhat nationally pre-existing 2015, 2016, but the big surge toward a governing power building strategy that unites electoral and non-electoral work and a block and build framework, the turning point was 2015, 2016. And we've had a new stage in the development of the US left since then.
Thank you. I want to turn now to this room and the folks that we have here with us. And I'm curious about if we're looking at the block and build framework, if we're understanding this as part of an overall mechanism to fundamentally shift things, how do you think the law can be wielded in service of the block and build strategy? Whose responsibility is it to do so? And then the follow-up, I guess, to that is, how can we push lawyers to be more affirmative about co-creating the strategy and to prevent further harm, from the overall situation, but also from potential harm that lawyers can create, and work on co-creating that strategy towards a multiracial front? Max, we'll start.
Well, that's what's so great about this webinar and what you're trying to do, which is, I think, an answer to that at any level of detail or depth is going to come much more from the participants in this process who are experts and know something about the legal side, much more than I do or than Linda does. I would just make two comments about maybe some broad step back things that might be useful. The first, I think you referred to it, it was referred to in the introduction that you and Nikki gave. There's a lot to learn from the right-wing project taking over their planned 30 or 40-year plan to take over the judicial system. They understood what it would take to develop a theory of law, the use of originalism and those kinds of concepts, develop a cadre of lawyers versed in that, throw a bunch of things against the wall and see what works, but with a long-range plan, not investing all their eggs in any one particular battle, but realizing they had a lodestar. We want to control the judiciary. They came out of a period where many on the left assumed that the courts would always be a protector of minority rights and so on, because of the period from Brown versus Board of Education through the early 70s. The courts seemed to be that. People were lulled on our side. Many were lulled into not realizing that in the long arc of US history, the judicial system is a conservative, anti-democratic force. The right wing understood that and figured out how to leverage the system. The other idea, and I think this also, they were very wise about this in their own way, which is understanding the thick relationship between political democracy and the fight for people to better people's conditions of life. That there is a very close relationship between fighting for the material things that people want, housing, healthcare, food security, a decent environment, and the amount of political democracy that they have. The left has often siloed those different things into different compartments. The right realized that restricting voting rights, reshaping the electorate, would limit the ability of the majority of people to win reforms and change the climate such that the majority of people's lives would improve in real, tangible, consistent ways. They understood, so they worked things. A long-range plan to take over the Supreme Court was linked to fights in local school boards and getting their people in charge of local school boards, was linked to building an operation in white evangelical churches. They linked concrete fights with a broad strategic plan of how to take over the courts. And we need to do the same from our point of view. The expansion of voting rights, for the first time even coming close to what is considered a bourgeois democracy, one person, one vote, each person's vote counting the same. That's never happened fully in this country, but the 65 Voting Rights Act moved us as closer to that than we'd ever been before, also combined with another important gain of the 60s, which was the ending of racist immigration quotas. And those two things in combination scared the wits out of the right wing, not only because of racism, but also because democracy, the expansion of democracy has always been on the right. They are suspicious of that for very real material reasons. So the ability to link the day-to-day fights that people on this call are involved in around housing, around environmental protection, around criminal justice, around all the other issues, around LGBTQ rights, trans rights now in the forefront, has to be linked to a vision of what the law can be, how it can be transformed within the limits of the constitutional system we have, and then to change that system in a different way. We've been quoting Maurice, Linda quoted Maurice Mitchell before. He has another great quote, which is, we need enough power within a rigged system to unrig it. We're not going to unrig it strictly from the outside. We have to have some power inside to unrig it. And the link between political democracy and the material change that tangible benefits for the majority of people in the country.
Linda?
Yeah, I just say three things about the legal side, speaking as a non-attorney. Thinking about how different sectors can implement a block and build frame. So I think for the legal sector, part of it is a mapping. So there's left, right, center, you know, for on the political landscape. And you all will know this at a level of detail and specificity that I don't, but just to say that it feels like there's a political mapping to be done in terms of legal education, in terms of your law journals, in terms of your faculties, in terms of your for-profit firms, in terms of your nonprofit firms, in terms of your association. I don't know, I'm imagining that there are associations of criminal attorneys, family law attorneys, immigration attorneys. So there's a political mapping to be done there at a level of specificity about organizations, individuals, where they stand, where you all need to strengthen relations from left to center, and around what. So and that's a big piece of work. The legal sector is a big sector, but the work needs to be engaged and it needs to be held, right? So that it's then updated, et cetera. So there's a mapping project, I would say. I don't know, maybe it's already done. But if not, then somebody needs to do it, or some set of people need to do it. There's a threat assessment piece, which it has to go to a level of detail, and also so that people are not just aware attack by attack, but that there's a broader threat assessment that can then be turned into, okay, strategically, how do we face this? So threat assessment, somebody put somewhere in one of these chats about, you know, folks going after nonprofit organizations. How widespread is that? How is it being undertaken? In what states, in what regions, through what mechanism, yada, yada, yada. So again, maybe we have that threat assessment already. Maybe we don't. If we don't, we need it. And then I think there's another piece, which is in the longer term, as Max is saying, this long-term proposition, multi-generational, this stuff is not getting turned around next week, next month, next year, right? So in the longer term, what's the infrastructure? What are the institutions that we need to either strengthen or build from scratch that are going to contribute to the build side of block and build, that are going to contribute to the gaining governing power side of build? So this is a lot of conversations that need to happen. Let's just say some of them within your sector and some between your sector and other sectors.
Well, thank you both so much. We have a number of questions from folks who have been really deeply engaged in these. So I'm just going to jump right in. I'll read one and then I'll kind of let you decide who wants to take this first one. So not surprisingly, we need to start with what is on a lot of folks' minds, which is this upcoming presidential election. And the first question is, what do you think about society's collective refusal to vote for Biden? And what would you what is your message? What would you say to Arab and Muslim civil society in this moment?
I happen to know that Max has been thinking about this a lot, so I'm going to turn it to Max.
Great.
Our basic project and this has always been a project, but has heightened in importance since October 7th, is to make the fight for Palestinian rights an integral part of the progressive movement and the fight against fascism, to defeat PEP, Progressive Except Palestine, which Palestine has been a third rail in US politics for reasons that I'm sure many people there understand. We can't go into all the complexity of that. So one of the features of Block and Build that we didn't get to talk about yet so much is that the anti-MAGA front is broad, it's diverse, and the progressives have to both build the anti-MAGA front and also contend for influence within it and fight against policies of some of the anti-MAGA forces that we disagree with. There's a complicated process of unity and struggle within a broad coalition like that. And since October 7th, around Gaza, and I would also say around immigration and immigrant rights, those two issues have come to the fore of the key divisions within the anti-MAGA front, which progressives have a responsibility to fight on. So we are opposing the Biden administration's policies in Gaza, and they're caving in and embracing the right-wing frame that immigrants are a problem or a threat, that it's a border crisis instead of a crisis of the right of people to stay home in peace and security in their own countries largely because of US foreign policy and exploitation. Right now, in the electoral field, the form that the fight is going to take is the defense of the squad, the defense of the people who are under attack by AIPAC. Cori Bush, Summer Lee, Jamal Bowman, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and others who are under attack. And we're going to contend with the mainstream Democrats around that. There's the immediate campaign around that is in Michigan, where Michigan is to listen to Michigan, vote uncommitted, to show that there is a huge constituency out there that wants to defeat MAGA, wants to vote Democratic to keep MAGA out, but won't stand for the fact that the US government is complicit in genocide. So we're going to do everything we can between now and the summer to make sure that the policy is shifted and we can go into the fall election with a clear difference where Palestine solidarity is a recognized part, or at least Palestinian life and survival with the Democratic Party, whereas with the Republican Party, it's a complete non-starter. I think when it comes to the fall, we're going to have to ask people, what is the path? What is the path to furthering Palestine solidarity in the United States after 2024? That path's going to be completely blocked under a Trump administration. Under a Trump administration, Palestine solidarity work is going to be functionally illegal. It's going to be classified as inherently anti-Semitic, and it'll be a civil rights violation. Just what DeSantis is doing in Florida, shutting down Students for Justice in Palestine, what Ellie Stefanik took the lead on in taking down president of Harvard University, that's going to become federal policy with the IRS, et cetera. IRS, Justice Department. In a Democratic administration, all the forces that have thrown down for a ceasefire will be stronger rather than weaker, especially the left wing of the labor movement. The UAW is going to be stronger under a Democratic administration than it is going to be under a Republican administration when the NLRB is turned over to the Koch brothers. That's why the UAW, which is the bright spot and has a track record now, can come out for a ceasefire and 2 weeks later endorse Biden. Unity and struggle within the front. There's a moral, on the level of morality, there's no argument. People who want to abstain from voting for Biden, if he's the nominee, There's no argument if it's a moral question for somebody. But if it's a question of what conditions the left and the progressives will face, including the Palestine Solidarity Movement in 2025, the path will be smoother. It's never going to be a smooth path. This is going to be a tough fight, just like the fight Linda was talking about pushing MAGA back to the margins. We'll have better conditions under a Democratic administration. Our vote is for a long-range path, not for any one particular election from a strategic point of view.
Thank you. I'm seeing a lot of appreciation for that analysis in the chat, and just really appreciating you grounding us there. We have just under 10 minutes for questions left, so I'm going to try to get through maybe 2 more, and we'll see how we do. So the next question we have is, we talk about the rise of the right as the MAGA bloc and build the left, but what is the center? And isn't that a bit of a buffer zone for authoritarianism? Can we help build a leftist center? Linda, would you like to start this one?
Yeah, I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but let me say that if I were looking, you know, at, if I were to identify the right center in this sense, I would say in our political environment that Biden is probably has functioned as a centrist president. He's not Trump, yeah. If so, this is where I want to refer back to the kind of abstentionist stance, which is both of them are the parties of capital, different elements of capital supporting different parties. But there's no yet that the orientation that there's no fundamental distinction. I think there is a distinction between the center and the right. I don't think Biden is a fascist. Biden is right now a co-conspirator in genocide in Palestine. That is true. But functionally, I don't think Biden is a fascist. And I think it's a grave mistake on the part of those of us on the left to confuse actual authoritarians and fascists with centrists. So I think there is a left, right, and center in the US. And I think developing political strategy that's effective is completely dependent on us understanding that. And if we obscure it and lump anybody who isn't identified leftist as a right winger or a pro-authoritarian or whatever, we're in big trouble. And I really do believe that the task right now is to get a better sense of who is in the center, who is in favor of protecting the baseline of democracy and get in relationship with them. We cannot do it alone. Has anybody noticed the weaknesses on the left?
I think some of us have noticed. Okay, I'm going to ask. I'm going to try to combine the last couple questions so that we can get to a few more. And I swear this is the question came in. I'm not being biased because I'm in Atlanta and love Atlanta deeply. But the next question was, how does this framework fit into places where liberal elites are the driving force behind authoritarian legislation, like Atlanta, Georgia? And the other question that I'm hoping maybe we can combine in and kind of maybe zoom out a bit is, do you know current experiences in the Latin American context where this strategy has been applied or analyzed? So one hyperlocal, one maybe kind of zooming out on the whole region. Who would like to start with that?
Well, I'll start on the first part. We have to fight where liberals are driving authoritarian policies. We fight. And in blue states, we have to fight them. In Atlanta, in New York City with Mayor Adams, in the Bay Area, we're fighting with Nancy Pelosi, who not only won't call for a ceasefire, but says people who are calling for a ceasefire should be investigated as potentially Russian or Chinese agents. That's the right-wing line. So we fight. And we fight with all the tools at our disposal, mass action, propaganda, narrative, and electoral challenges in primaries where we can. And at times, there may be a challenge at the local level, where elections are nonpartisan and so on outside of the Democratic Party. And then we have to unite to keep MAGA out of power with those who will. And the more we fight and the more we succeed, and not only in the contention part, but in the base building part and all the other elements of building power that Linda spoke about, we can influence the center. Bernie influenced Biden in 2020, not on foreign policy, but on many domestic issues. We showed enough strength behind Bernie that he was able to negotiate and had an influence within the center and move the center to the left. Biden's breaking with some of the neoliberal orthodoxy. We haven't moved the center on foreign policy. That shouldn't be a surprise. Foreign policy is the most closely held part of the elite. It's the most distant from democratic accountability. You can't even get congressional oversight of many kinds of things, much less popular oversight. Every US president since 1898 at least has been a war criminal. So foreign policy is a tougher nut to crack. But we will have more strength to do that with a long-range power building strategy that builds up our conditions. But we don't surrender the fight against authoritarian policies at the local level, Cop City or what have you, because somebody's wears a D and is a Democrat and is going to vote against Trump in 2024. We have to fight. That's building up our independent power. I think we have to fight in a way that positions us as the most determined and reliable opponents of MAGA. Because the masses of people, particularly in vulnerable communities, the core base of progressive policy is existentially scared of MAGA. We shouldn't dismiss that. That's very important. If we don't if the left doesn't position itself as firmly opposed to MAGA, as well as to authoritarian stuff when it's opposed by Democrats, we're never going to be able to win influence. We have to be thinking of ourselves as potentially leading a governing coalition. That's part of the governing power thing. We can't think of ourselves solely as an oppositional force. That's a dead end. That will lead us totally toward marginalization. We have to think about, we are going to lead a coalition that's going to govern the country.
I kind of on the same piece. I want to underscore what Max said and note that this is not where the left has been for a very long time. And it in part accounts for the kind of weakness and fragmentation on the left side of the spectrum. So we're at the front edge of trying to figure out how do we overcome that weakness and fragmentation. And I think one danger here is that we drop into kind of frustration and despair at the relative power that the left has in relationship to the center and the right. We can't afford to do that. We can't afford to do that. And we also should engage with, okay, if not this, if not block and build, then what? We have the discussion and the debate about strategy, but come with something besides, we don't like the liberals. We don't like the neither do we. We don't like the neoliberals. We don't like the center. They're all the same. Some other, if there's another orientation to actually accumulating over time the level of power that's going to change our people's condition, which is wretched at the moment, just walk out in the street. Wretched. If we're actually going to accumulate the power to change those conditions, let's talk about how we do it. Not just that we don't like Biden.
Thank you.
Which I don't.
Absolutely. Underscored that. Thank you both so much. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions. Some of these questions will absolutely come up in some of our upcoming sessions. So certainly we will get to more of these conversations. Please join me in the chat in thanking our speakers today. Truly, from the bottom of my heart, we're so thankful for your analysis, for your clarity, and for your leadership on this. Really honored to get to speak with you, and just really our team put a lot into this series. I want to particularly shout out the folks who have been holding down the communications and the tech and all of the infrastructure that went into putting this on. And it was really because we knew how powerful it would be to hold space for you guys. I really want to ask, before folks hop off, to please complete this very short 3-question survey about the webinar so that we can continue to improve upon them. We dropped it in the chat. It's also wanted to name that there's actually a resources tab on your window here. So along the bottom here, there's a list of resources that are available. We put the registration for the upcoming webinars in there, ways to stay in touch with Movement Law Lab, but also Grassroots Power Project, which Linda named specifically around their governing power resources, Project 2050, as well as a series that we're doing with Convergence Magazine called Dispatches on Democracy, that is specifically geared toward the legal sector. So if you click on that resources button, you have links to all of those. We will, of course, also send those out to everyone who registered for this webinar. And we are going to leave it there. Max and Linda, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your generosity in being here with us today.
Thank you.
All right, folks, please fill out that survey. Take care, and we'll see you at session 2, which is March 22nd, next month, March 22nd. We'll see you there. Thanks, y'all.
Bye, everyone.